Decimals and place value. In the past, we've learned about how to read and write whole numbers. And we learned how if you have the ones place and the tens place and the hundredths place, and there would be a decimal there, if you have 10 ones, that's the same thing as 110. So if you have 10 ones, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, that's the same thing as writing 10, or a 1 in the tens place. So just imagine there's 10 little ones in there. And once you have 10 ones, you can pull out 10 of them and put 1 in the tens place. So you have the ones place and you have the tens place. And the same thing with the tens. If you have 10 tens, so if you have 10, 10, 10, 10, that's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. If you have 10 tens, that's the same thing as 1/100. Okay, so that's how whole numbers work. Now when we're talking about decimals, it's a similar idea. So let's look at the different decimals. So if you have a whole, let's say this box represents a whole, then that would be like you'd have a 1 in the ones place. Now that 1, if we wanted to write it as tenths, which is tenths, there is 10 tenths to equal 1 whole. So 10 tenths is the same thing as the number 1, or a 1 whole. So 10 tenths is 1 whole. So if this box is a whole, we can divide it up into 10 pieces. So let's say we have, so there's 2 pieces. There's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pieces. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pieces. So if this whole is broken up into 10 pieces, each of those pieces is 1/10. So this piece right here is 1/10. Okay, if we wanted to write 1, the number 1, in terms of tenths, we would just write 10 tenths. 10 tenths. Okay, now what happens when we have 20 tenths? When we have 20 tenths, so that would actually be 2 boxes, right? Because if each box had 10 tenths, and I won't draw them all, but if each box was divided into 10 pieces, each one of those pieces is a tenth, then if we have 20 tenths, we would have 2 wholes. So 20 tenths equals 2 wholes. So 2 whole numbers, which is just the number 2. And you would write that as 2. And if you wanted to write 2 in terms of tenths, you would just put a 0.0. That would be read. Well, most people would read that as 2.0, or 2 0 tenths. But if you wanted to read it in terms of tenths, it would be 20 tenths. Because you always say the place value of the digit farthest to the right. So that would be 20 tenths. But like I said, most people would just drop the tenths and just call that 2 or 2.0. Now what if we wanted to write the number 1 in terms of hundredths? Well, we have our ones place, then we have our tenths place. The next place is the hundredths place. So you have the decimal and then you have the tenths. tenths, and then you have the hundredths. The hundredths place. And if we wanted to write 1, the number 1, in terms of hundredths, it would be written like this, 1.00, and you could read that as 100 hundredths. Hundredths. Okay, 100 hundredths is the same thing as 1, so that equals 1. 1 whole is 100 hundredths. And one way to think about that is just like we took a whole and we divided it up into tenths, okay, if there's 10 pieces, we can also take that whole and divide each of those tenths into 10 pieces, which would make the whole be 100 pieces. Okay, so if you were to actually draw this out, you would find 10 little boxes in each column, and then 10 rows, and then if you added up all the squares, you would have 100 squares. And each of those squares would be 1/100th of the whole. So the whole is the whole box, and then the number of pieces in the box would be 100. So those are called, each one of those boxes called 1/100th. And if you have 2 100ths, then you have 2 boxes. And the way you would write that would be you put the number in the hundredths column. So if you have a number 0.02, that would be read as 2 hundredths. 2 hundredths. That would represent 2 little boxes. You'd have one box and another box. 2 hundredths. So that's 2 100ths of a whole. Okay, so let's say we have 500 hundredths. 500 hundredths. And we want to say, how many tenths is that? Well, if you have 500 hundredths, so each whole we talked about was 100 hundredths. We also said that each whole represents 10 tenths. So we have a whole, so one whole, and these are all equal, and they all equal one whole. So we have one whole, we have 10 tenths, but we also have 100 hundredths. And that, they all equal the same thing. So let's say we have 500 hundredths. That means that we have 5 of these boxes. So we have 5 times 100 hundredths. So in terms of tenths, well, we know 100 hundredths is the same thing as 10 tenths. And if we have 5 boxes, that means we have 5 of these boxes too that have 10 tenths in them. So 5 times 10 would be 50. So we would actually have 50 tenths. So 500 hundredths is the same thing as 50 tenths. And you would write that as like this. 500 hundredths. Remember, we're using the last digit when we name it. So since it's the ones, the tenths, and then the hundredths, we use the hundredths in that case. And that's going to equal the same thing as 50 tenths. And there's the tenths place. So you see that it's the same thing as writing 5, but in case we write a decimal and a 0, this would be tenths, and this would be hundredths. And you would read it 500 hundredths, 50 tenths, or the number 5, or just 5. Now let's say we have 4 ones and 9/10. 4 ones and 9/10. So that, if you actually wrote the number, would be 4.9. 4 ones and 9/10 would be written 4.9. And if we want to put that just in terms of tenths, we want to know how many tenths that is. So it equals something tenths. Well, let's take a look. We know that 9 just represents 9/10. But how many tenths does the 4 represent? Well, we know it's 4 wholes, right? Because it's just the number 4. So I could draw 4 boxes. And we knew from before that each box you can put 10/10 in. So you have 10/10 there, 10/10 there, 10/10 there, and 10/10 there. So we have 10, 20, 30, 40 tenths, but we also have that extra 9/10. So we would actually have 49 tenths. So 4 ones and 9/10. The 4 ones represents 40 tenths. 40 tenths. And then the 9/10 represents 9/10. So you just add those together to get 49 tenths.